Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, across the country. Boy, it is going to be a dandy today. This is Cleveland, Ohio, so you move the Browns out of the way right now, move their training camp facility out there towards Lake Erie. We'll move the Indians out. They're on Chicago tonight, playing at Wrigley Field. We'll also move the Cavaliers. I know the draft is tonight, so who knows what they're going to get out of it. But this is the show that's coming front and center. This is the American Sports History Podcast, hosted by Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it, 347-205-9631. You can catch the archive version on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports podcast platforms, powered by Mancini Media. So without further ado, let me lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. It's more of him, less than me. Peter, first of all, how are you? Second of all, how can people get hold of you? Third of all, you got another legend coming through the show tonight.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. Ray. And you're absolutely right about tonight's guest. He's got 7 years in covering Los Angeles sports as a writer and reporter in digital media, a native of San Pedro, California. Welcome to the show, Mr. Chris Camello.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Mark, it's been a while. Thanks for having me on here, man. It's great to be here.
Well, you've been, I haven't really. I mean, you've been really putting the time in. You've been involved 7 years in sports writing. Can you tell us about your career as a sports writer and reporter?
Yeah, so it kind of started. Gosh, where can I go back to? Kind of my college days. I was writing. I became a writer with the college newspaper. I'm a alumni of Cal State Dominguez Hills, and so I kind of started writing with them. And then after I graduated, I got my bachelor's degree. I started doing freelance for the Daily Breeze newspaper, and I still kind of do that now, covering high school football, baseball, basketball, whenever they kind of needed me. It was sort of like on an as-needed basis. So I've been, up until the pandemic hit, I was kind of doing that the last 6 seasons, and mostly covering South Bay, where I live, San Pedro, Torrance, Wilmington, a lot of the high schools in that area. And then also too, I've been writing for different online publications and covering the LA Clippers. I've covered USC. I've covered the Dodgers, the Angels. I've done spring trainings. And recently I was actually, the last couple of years, I've been doing the LA Sparks on the WNBA side. And in fact, I was just on a Zoom call today, talking with the Sparks GM/head coach, Derek Fisher, about Neko Ogwumike, the Sparks star center, not making it on the U.S. women's Olympic team for basketball. So it's been a lot there, keeping me busy, and so now I'm with a website called nightcastmedia.com. I also host my own podcast, Camello's Corner, which I'm going to drop a new one tomorrow. And I've also been a Lakers fan group called Showtime Forum, and I'm a co-host for that podcast as well. So I've kind of got my hands in a few different pots, Peter, so to speak.
Well, that's wonderful. Really something very impressive. Now, as you're a Los Angeles Lakers fan, and when LeBron James left Cleveland to go to the Lakers, it was very tough for people here. I know it was tough for me, but then you think about it, and really the Lakers are probably the coolest franchise in NBA history, and they have such an amazing tradition going back, having Wilt Chamberlain at the end of his career, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and on to the Shaq Kobe era, and now, of course, LeBron. Would you like to talk about your experiences as a Los Angeles Lakers fan?
Yeah, so my fandom, if you want to call it that, goes back to when I was about 6, 7 years old. Actually, my older brother Johnny was a big Laker fan. So my parents were kind of whatever when it came to sports. My brother Johnny was a big Laker fan. So he would always try to get my dad, we would have the TV on during dinner, turn it on to Channel 9. KCAL 9 used to be the home of the Lakers, before they got this network and all the media rights changed over the last 10 years. So it kind of got me into sports then. Obviously, I don't have a lot of fond memories, but by the time I started watching, or I should say I don't have many vivid memories, but when I first started watching it, I remember the Lakers had just gotten Kobe Bryant. They had just gotten Shaq. So I started getting into that era, with Van Exel and Eddie Jones and those guys and whatnot. So, but when the Lakers won their first championship in the post-Showtime era was 2000, and I was in the fourth grade, and I remember the big comeback against Portland in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals, the alley-oop, Kobe to Shaq, and that really put my fandom on a whole different level. And at that point, I was hooked. I was watching every single game. I would go crazy when they win. I'd cry when they lose. When you're 9, 10 years old, you don't have a ton else going on in your life. So Lakers were it. So I was very fortunate early in my life to experience that first three-peat era with Phil Jackson and Kobe and Shaq and the others, Derek Fisher, Robert Horry, Rick Fox, Brian Shaw. Those guys became iconic for the Lakers. So, and of course, all the games were on NBA on NBC, so I got to hear the likes of Marv Albert and Bob Costas, and when it wasn't nationally televised, hear the soothing sounds of Chick Hearn with Stu Lantz. So it was, I was very lucky to grow up during that era and listen to these iconic voices, and I think that's also what propelled me to want to get into sports media as well.
Now, moving on to baseball, another tremendous tradition, the Los Angeles Dodgers, going back to shortly after the move from Brooklyn. They're winning a title in the 60s. I was a little boy in the 60s, and I remember Sandy Koufax, and they were a tough team, Don Drysdale, and into the 70s, really a cool team, late 70s, and with Steve Garvey, and then onward, Oral Hershiser, and then Gerson. They did win last year, and lost a couple. That was tough, losing a couple World Series. Would you like to talk about your experiences, Chris, as a Los Angeles Dodgers fan?
Man, it's filled with triumph, but also a lot of heartbreak, especially in recent years. Like you mentioned, they went to a couple World Series in 2017 and 2018, and lost to the Astros, which we then found out was part of a cheating scandal. And then the year after against a really good Boston Red Sox team that was just clicking on all cylinders the entire season. And in the postseason, I think they ended up going 11-3 in the playoffs, which is very, very impressive. But the fact is the Dodgers over the last 8-9 years have really been a great team to watch. And even before that, when they were making the playoffs, they had some really good teams, well managed. Joe Torre helped get them back on the map in 2008, and even before that, Jim Tracy and Grady Little got them into the playoffs. But this last 5 years, they've really been one of the best teams in baseball, and that wasn't always a tradition that was set, especially during the 90s when I first started watching the Dodgers. They were sort of a 500-ish. 500-ish kind of team, and other teams would, in that division were consistently going to the playoffs and doing well. The Giants and the Padres and, even the Rockies for a few years. So to see what the Dodgers have done and how they've been able to build this great culture and now because they've always had a great fan base, but now you're matching that great fan base and that dedicated fan base, and you're rewarding them with success. Yeah, it may not always lead to a World Series championship every year, but they've consistently been in the mix, and that's really all you can ask for. And for a team that didn't go to any World Series between 1988 and 2017, and now they've gone 3 out of the last 5 years, that's pretty impressive right there. So I think they've been on the uptick. They're finding talent. They're getting free agent talent. They're drafting really well. They're developing their own talent. They're finding guys out of the garbage bin, so to speak, guys that were basically thought to be never was-es, guys like Chris Taylor and Max Muncy. So their scouting is next level, and they've really built a positive culture. And I'll never forget what former GM Farhan Zaidi said. He said, we're not interested in winning one World Series. We're interested in winning the next 10. Or being in a position to win the next 10. And they've certainly accomplished in that aspect because they're going to be in a position for the next 10 years plus because of the culture and the scouting and all of those things that they have really developed over the last 5-6 years.
We had a guy here in Cleveland, one of the most entertaining players in baseball, talented and entertaining, and of course he played for L.A. What are your thoughts on Yasiel Puig?
Well, Puig Mania, the wild horse. Yeah, during that time in 2013, I'll never forget when he got called up, the Dodgers just needed something. And at the time, it was obvious that when he got called up, they needed that energy, that intensity, and of course he had the talent to match all of that. And unfortunately for Puig, he never was able to build on that 2013 season. And every year it was either an injury or some sort of regression that kind of led to why he wasn't pushing forward. I issued Yasiel Puig, and then there was stories that he wouldn't listen to the coaches about where to be positioned in right field and would tear up, those little cheat sheets that these players have about where to be positioned based on shifts and whatnot. So I think his attitude really led to his own detriment. I think Puig had all the talent in the world, didn't take the game seriously enough to want to work on this, his skill set, because we all know, guys, pitchers make adjustments. Teams make adjustments. If you can't adjust to those, you're going to be out of the league quick. You're going to become a one-trick pony and pitchers are going to quickly figure you out on how to get you out. And if you don't change mechanics in your swing or in your defense, and you have an attitude problem on top of that, you're going to be out of a job. And that's where it's at. That's why his career didn't last too long. Puig could be a future Hall of Famer. He had that much talent and that much potential, but if you don't work on it and you have all these other issues, then no one's really going to want to deal with you after that.
I think the NFL in Los Angeles is really interesting. Their first team, the Rams, actually came from Cleveland. They won the NFL title in Cleveland in '45, then immediately moved to L.A. and won the title in '51. That's actually the last L.A. NFL title. So it's the longest in the NFL history at the moment. And then so they had the Rams, and then they had the Raiders, and the Raiders won in '84. It's like, so, oh wow, all of a sudden the LA's got two teams. And then the Rams moved to St. Louis, and then the Raiders go back to Oakland. It's like, man, LA doesn't have an NFL team. This is such a strange. And that went on for a while. And of course, now the Rams are back in LA, and then the Chargers, and that must hurt Mark Mancini. They moved up from LA. What are your thoughts on the NFL and LA?
Yeah, it took them a while to get back here, and it didn't make sense to me because here's LA, second largest media market in the country, and they don't have an NFL team, which is the most popular sport in this country. It surpassed basketball and baseball to be the most popular sport. So it didn't make sense, but I'm glad eventually Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, uprooted out of St. Louis, which is also another good sports town, and brought him back here to LA. I think it's taken fans a while to get back on that track, even though the team went to the Super Bowl 3 years ago. They've got a really good coach in Sean McVay. They just made some big-time moves this offseason to get a good quarterback in Matthew Stafford and parting ways with Jared Goff, who wasn't able to take that next leap forward. But they've got a really good defense. They've got good coaching, and they're going to be a good team. And hopefully the city of L.A. continues to rally around them, especially since they've also got a new stadium at SoFi Stadium in Inglewood. So I'm looking forward to eventually going there and catching a game because they are going to be at full capacity this upcoming season. As far as the Chargers go, they haven't really been able to get as much support around them. I think LA has seen them as intruders, and San Diego has seen them as basically disloyal. So you single-handedly with this move pissed off two fan bases. And I think the Chargers are going to be in the same situation as the Clippers, where it's like, yeah, you'll have a few fans, but ultimately people are going to be rooting more for the Rams than they are for the Chargers. But on the other hand, it is good to see two LA teams from the two NFL teams back here in LA. And, the Chargers are going to be pretty good with Justin Herbert really good, talented young quarterback. They just brought in a new coaching staff, Brandon Staley, the former Rams defensive coordinator. So they've got some talent, but it's gonna take them a few years to get rolling. Whereas the Rams, I think they've got a window of the next 2 to 3 years, but they could really make some noise in the NFC. So, but it's great to see these teams back here in LA.
You know, you're involved with covering the WNBA, and the Sparks won the WNBA finals in 2001, 2002, 2016. Cleveland had a team, and I'm obsessed with supporting Cleveland teams, and then they were a contender, and then the team moved. I thought, and I was so bummed out. So we haven't had a WNBA team for quite a while. And what are your thoughts on the Cleveland Rockers? Yeah, they were a contender. Yeah. I was visiting from the Philippines. I didn't know. In fact, I remember turning on the TV. I didn't even know we had a team. I turned it on the TV, and I was like, "Oh, Cleveland! What? Look at this!" And they beat New York Liberty, and then they were. And then anyway, I guess Dan Gilbert pulled the plug. They were losing money, I would guess. And so anyway, what are your thoughts on the Los Angeles Sparks and the WNBA?
The Sparks have done a pretty good job in recent years. They've been a playoff team. They just got new management. Derek Fisher was hired as the head coach 3 years ago, and they recently gave him executive powers. So he's now a general manager as well as a head coach, operating in two roles. This year's been a little bit of a year of a transition. They lost some key players. They lost about 3 or 4 key players in the past offseason. Candace Parker, longtime All-Star, and really was the face of the franchise. Terlisa Leslie retired, and now she's moved on. She's playing for her hometown team of Chicago, playing for the Chicago Sky. They still have the Ogumake sisters, Nneka and Shanae, and Shanae is obviously trying to balance 2 careers right now as a professional ball player and a media personality for ESPN. And Nneka, former MVP, former champion, she's going through a knee injury right now, but they got a lot of new faces, a lot of young faces, so they're trying to get the team situated. They're 5-7 right now, so they've had a couple of tough losses. I think honestly they're going to be playing 500 ball at this point. There's a lot of other really good teams in the WNBA that are loaded, and I just don't know if this Sparks team, especially with the injury and all the new faces that they have, it's going to be tough for them to be as competitive as they were in years past. So they could win on any given night. They've got a lot of really talented guards, but just if you start going up against the really good teams, the Storm and the Aces and even the Connecticut Sun have had a really good season so far, it's going to be tough for them to compete on that level. But, hey, they come out, they play hard every night. I've been fortunate enough to cover a few Sparks games so far this season. They're currently playing at the old LA Convention Center until the Clipper season comes to an end, and then, or the NBA season, I should say, comes to an end, and they'll be able to go back to their regular home of Staples Center. But, WNBA, I think it's getting better. I'm glad to see that the viewership is up. I wonder how long it's going to last because, still to this day, a lot of people aren't zoned in on the WNBA on a women's pro sports league as they are the NBA or MLB or NFL or even the NHL for that matter.
Now, it's interesting, the Los Angeles Clippers. I always wondered in these cities where you have more than one team, and, I have cousins in the New York area, and I always wondered, why would you support one team rather than another? And in L.A., it's pretty drastic between the Lakers and the Clippers. Do you have any ideas about that? Is there any geographic factor in becoming a Clipper fan or what are the factors that lead you to be a Clippers fan rather than a Laker fan in Los Angeles?
Yeah, it's not really a geographic thing like it is with the Angels and the Dodgers. Angels are in Anaheim. That's more OC. They belong to Orange County a lot more, whereas Dodger fans are more L.A., any place within L.A. Not to say that there's not Angel fans within L.A., but with the Clippers and the Lakers, it's a little bit different. The Clippers' history starts off in Buffalo, and then it ended up in San Diego, and then they eventually made their way to Los Angeles back in the 80s, and they just never, they've kind of always been seen as a clown franchise. They've always had bad teams, bad ownership, as we found out with Donald Sterling for a long time. Just a lot of poor moves. Over the last 10 years, they've been a little bit more credible. They were able to land star players through trades. They were able to draft really well. But even then, they weren't as good. You know, the Lakers had like a 7-year stretch where they weren't doing anything. And the Clippers were making the playoffs and had opportunities to make long runs, only to get eliminated in the first or second round. But I don't think it's a geographic thing. I just think the Lakers have been here longer. They've been in Los Angeles since the 60s. They've won a lot of championships. They've done a lot of great things in the city of Los Angeles, whereas the Clippers have kind of always been cellar dwellers. They've always been sort of the league laughing stock. They've never been able to retain a lot of their good talent. I mean, the Lakers, think about it like this, Peter. The Lakers have one of the greatest owners in professional team sports ever in Dr. Jerry Buss. Clippers had one of the worst owners in the history of American team sports in Donald Sterling. So now things are better with Steve Ballmer, but, you know, I just think for a long time people just were indifferent about the Clippers, and it was sort of like they were sort of like the joke of the city. I'm just telling you what I've been told and what I've experienced, and that's just what it is. And even now, nobody's rooting for the Clippers to be successful because it's like, hey, you know what? We don't support you. We actually took pleasure in your misery. That's the mentality of Laker fans.
Well, they must have fans. Now, why would anyone be a Clippers fan in Los Angeles?
Probably the underdog mentality. I think that's what it is. The Clippers don't have the success as the Lakers, but still, people liked some of the star players. People liked the fact that they were overlooked and made fun of for a long time, and maybe it's their way of being like, hey, I'm being supportive to the very end. The issue with Clipper fans, though, is I respect the fans who have been there since day one, right? The fans who've been there through the 21-win seasons and constantly in the draft lottery, which is, by the way, going on tonight. I respect those fans who've grinded out the awful years and the awful ownership. I don't respect Clipper fans who recently just try to jump on the bandwagon because all of a sudden they're a better team and they're a more competitive team. But I'm not sure why, that's a great question. I'm not sure why one team or why fans cheer on one team over another. But I'll tell you this, it's hard to be a fan of both. It's really difficult to be a fan of both teams. It's kind of like I said, Dodgers and Angels. You kind of have to root for one and not necessarily the other. But it's not a geographic thing. I think it's just one of those things, hey, I'm not a Laker fan. I don't like them being Hollywood and all that stuff. I'm going to root for the Clippers because, hey, they're the underdogs and I'm an underdog and I'm blue collar and all of that stuff. I think that's the direction they've tried to go in recent years in order to get more fans.
As a sports fan, you have the team you support, and then you pay attention during especially the Super Bowl, World Series, NBA Finals, and that makes a strong impression on your mind. And for me personally, the LA Lakers 2001 and 02, that's burned in my memory as just wow. I mean, what can you? Shaquille O'Neal, this guy who's like Godzilla, and Kobe, and all those guys, Robert Horry, and you mentioned Derek Fisher, that brought him to mind, Rick Fox, and so that's extremely. I'm not a LA sports fan, but that team is burned in my memory. Do you want to talk a little bit about the LA Lakers 2001 and 02?
It was a special group. It was a group that. So a lot of those players that you mentioned were on the team before they won championships. So they had to kind of go through the trials and tribulations. They got swept 3 years in a row before their championship in 2000. They got swept by the Utah Jazz, who, when you look on paper, you would say to yourself, okay, Stockton and Malone and Hornacek, but the Lakers have Shaq, Kobe, Eddie Jones, Nick Van Exel. They had Fox already. They had Fisher. They had Horry. They had all these other guys. Why are the Lakers not only losing, why are they getting swept by these guys? And I think a lot of it came down to maturity. I think some of it was coaching. I think some of it was personnel, where you didn't really know who was who in the pecking order. You knew Shaq was the number one, but was Kobe the number two over Eddie Jones? Where did Van Exel fit in? And it took somebody like Phil Jackson to come in, along with some savvy front office moves by then GM Jerry West, create a situation where it's like, okay, our building blocks are now Shaq and Kobe. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We've got enough role players. We'll add a couple more guys that bring experience, that bring toughness, who have won championships. They brought in A.C. Green. They brought in Horace Grant. They brought in Ron Harper for 2 of those championships. And we're going to get guys who have not only won, but understand how to play alongside star players and will eventually help them along. And, of course, you brought in the Zen master himself, Phil Jackson, who not only won 6 championships, but always brought an eclectic group together and knew how to manage egos and, of course, understood the triangle offense and how to get everybody involved and feature Shaq within that. I mean, there was just so many things that eventually came together. And I think there was the hunger factor that those Laker teams were hungry. And you had a guy like Kobe Bryant every year who wanted to prove people wrong and show that he was the best player in the league. Shaq wanted to prove that he belonged among the great big men of all time and put his name alongside the Kareems, the Wilts, the Bill Russells, David Robinson and all of those guys. And he felt like, hey, I belong, like even Olajuwon as well, a 2-time NBA champion himself. So Shaq wanted to etch his name on there. Kobe wanted to put his name on there. And, when you have a team that buys into a coach's concept, willing to accept their roles, willing to accept the responsibility, buys into all the hard work and tough practices and whatever it takes to win, that's when good things usually happen. And, of course, you have to have luck. You have to be able to stay healthy. You've got to be able to, avoid any disastrous situations. And those were some tough championships to win, no question about it. Even the year that they went 15-1 in 2001, one of the greatest Laker teams of all time. But even those, that was not an easy road to win a championship. So those were some special teams, man. And Shaq and Kobe were special, and they were special together. And still to this day, the most dynamic duo I've ever seen of my generation.
Back in the 70s, the L.A. Dodgers hired Tommy Lasorda, one of my favorite managers, and because he had such a wonderful spirit, very outgoing and very enthusiastic. And he used to say that he bled Dodger blue. Now the rival was the Cincinnati Reds. Sparky Anderson, the manager, said, yeah, tell Tommy that if you cut a guy open, their blood's red. Now my question to you, Chris, is: do you bleed Dodger blue?
Yes, I do. And I also bleed Laker purple and gold. Those have always been my teams. I know I'm in the sports media business. I try to look at the games objectively, and I do. But, when you're not always on assignment and you're just in the comfort of your own home, you're going to root like a regular fan, and you're going to go crazy when they win. You're going to be upset when they lose. So, yeah, I do bleed Dodger blue. I bleed Laker purple and gold as well. Those have been my 2 teams since day one, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
How many times have you seen Kirk Gibson's home run in Game 1 of the 1988 World Series?
Gosh, I've seen it so much that at some point before the Dodgers won this World Series, I was kind of burnt out with it. But when you go back and you watch the documentaries and you watch what was going on behind the scenes and how Gibby was basically on 2 bad legs, going out there trying to give it everything he has against one of the game's elite closers in Dennis Eckersley. It's still one of the most iconic moments, not just in Dodger history, but in the history of baseball. I mean, there are some clutch hits I've seen over the last 10 years in the playoffs, and I've seen some guys really deliver in October. Derek Jeter, David Freese, who was another guy that came through in October. Cody Ross, go back to the 2010 Giants. That was a guy that just kind of came out of nowhere. But for Gibby, who was the MVP that year, who was the Dodgers' best player, who had kind of limped through October, it was pretty incredible what he did that night. And that's going to be part of baseball and Dodger lore forever, man. And that's something that we're going to have to tell our kids and our grandkids about.
Our guest has been Chris Camello, who is a writer-reporter in Los Angeles sports and digital media for 7 years. Chris, do you have any final words for our audience? The time has flown by.
Usually does. Time flies when you're having fun, Peter. No, I just wanted to say, as far as Cleveland goes, that championship that they won in 2016 for the Cavs, that was well deserved. That was well earned. I mean, the Cavs were down 3-1 to arguably one of the greatest teams of all time in the 2016 Golden State Warriors, the 73-9 Warriors, and the fact that they were able to dig themselves out of that hole thanks to what LeBron and Kyrie did and those assortment of role players, that's something that the city of Cleveland should revel in forever. So, yes, I understand LeBron James leaving must have been tough, but at that point, that debt had been repaid. And hopefully Cleveland will have another championship in the not-so-distant future because you know what? It's a great sports town and a very committed fan base. So thank you for having me on. You could follow me on all social media platforms at Chris_Camello on Twitter, CCamello1 on Instagram, and Facebook as well, Camello's Corner by Chris Camello. So thank you again, Peter, for having me on. Thanks, Mark. I'm glad we were able to do this, and take it easy, guys. Enjoy.
Well, it was awful nice of you to say that about Cleveland sports. It's nice when people outside the city are supporting another city. That's a nice, good spirit. So thank you so much for that, Chris. Next week, our guest will be Keith Engel, who is involved with has a sports network in New York City. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. Chris Camello.